My name's Ed Hild. I'm an architect in the Microsoft Technology Center in Reston, Virginia. Just from a show of hands, has anybody been to an MTC? We're a worldwide org, so they're all over the place. Just a few. Okay, I'll explain a little bit what that means then, since the rest of you are new to this. But before I get off this slide, if there's any one thing you want to leave from other than a picture of me, is this aka.ms URL that's here, PP for SP. I put the slide deck, some of the exports of my Power Apps, some of the exports of the flows, links to a whole bunch of resources where you can pretty much build every demo that I'm going to show you here. All of that content's there. It's on Point Drive in LinkedIn. So also feel free to follow me. I post a lot of content, blogs, things along those lines as well. I will pause for that. Awesome. Okay, so my backup title, by the way, for this presentation was a little too long to fit into the submission form for Ignite. My backup title was, I used to do blank in InfoPath. How do I do blank in Power Apps? Blank, they wouldn't accept. So if you're in for that kind of stuff, then you are in the right spot. So like I said, the MTCs were a worldwide organization. I'm from the one just outside of DC, which is Reston, Virginia. And I work with customers day in and day out, doing a variety of different things, which ultimately comes down to giving them advice and helping them solve problems. So this session really is an output of questions I get asked over and over and over and over again. And there's definitely seems to be a bit of a gap, because I don't know everyone else's impression, but a lot of times when Power Apps is being presented, or the Power Platform as a whole, it's done very much from a dynamics point of view, and a little less from a collaboration Office 365 point of view. But there's certainly a lot of value to that tool set to our area. And I do say our, I've been at Microsoft 14 years. I came in as a SharePoint developer originally, so I have that background. And so what I thought I would do is just spend the day showing you a variety of solutions. Now, because of the volumes, I want to make sure I hit on some things that maybe people might have as a problem within their own space. I'm not going to go deep in any one particular demo, but I'm going to point out the gold nuggets, which are the keys to the individual problems. And then you can go back to that URL and read all the details if you want to build out that particular solution. Sound like fair game? Awesome. All right. So my demos are going to incorporate, what do I mean by the Power Platform? If you have not picked it up already, Power Apps plus Microsoft Flow and Power BI. I did not rebrand my slides with the name change in Flow. I'm not unique in that from what I've seen. And I'm going to emphasize more the Flow and the Power Apps piece, more so than Power BI. So we're going to start just with a simple end-to-end demonstration that incorporates all three. And then we'll start diving down into my development environment, which somehow ran out of power. And we'll go from there. This screen. All right. So you may have seen this demonstration before, but I guarantee you have not seen this version of it. This was like, Power App 101, build a device ordering system, right? The difference is this one is backed by SharePoint List, right? So it doesn't reach out to common data service, and there's other things if you've built this in the past. To give you an idea of the level of effort it took to build this demonstration, there's no line of code more complicated than an Excel formula sitting inside of it. And the primary data source for this is an Excel spreadsheet. So it has all of the different devices, all the different pricing and everything else, and the SharePoint list is only storing what someone wants to procure. So notice I have embedded this in a SharePoint page, right? So think of it, this is a use of Power Apps from the perspective of almost building a custom web part, right? So I can go in, by the way, these are not current devices, nor is the pricing current at all. Notice some of the conditional formatting that's there, making people alert that they shouldn't really be spending too much money. I could go in and pick some ones that I want to look at. Could compare to go to a second screen inside of this web part. And let me zoom in here for you. Notice I'm logged in with my administrative account, but it's also automatically determined who my boss is, right? Who I report to for approval. But we're going to save ourselves some time logging in and out. This probably shouldn't be a text field. That was meant to be a little bit of humor, but nobody laughed. That's okay. Yeah. I have the need for speed. I'm a big movie quote guy, so I apologize in advance. And that has gone ahead and already done the submission. I didn't bother with the confirmation screen. Too many details here, but that is writing new entries into my SharePoint list. So if I scroll down here, we should see our new one all the way at the bottom. So here's that Dell that was over almost $1,300. It's currently in review, right? I have the need for speed. Now you notice I did get the email alert there, which is my flow that's triggered for approval. To give you an idea of what that looks like, let's go into the email and do the approval, and then we'll take a look at the flow. So one of the things, again, put your SharePoint back hat on. The trivia question for today is how many clicks does it take to approve a task with a SharePoint workflow? Yeah, it's not one. Yeah, it is quite a few, because you usually get a task, right? And you click the link, it's a link to a task, and you have to put the task in edit mode, that's another click. Then you have to go and say it's 100% complete, right? Then click submit, and all of that, you didn't even look at what you were reviewing. Right? So one of the things about Flow that makes it really appealing is the ability to support actionable messages and be able to have these cards that are interactive. Now, of course, this is not the only way I could do this approval inside of email. I could log into Flow itself, do it from there or off my mobile phone. But this is the way that a lot of business users tend to do it. So I'll go ahead and keep the same tactic here and go ahead and submit that back. That's going to go ahead and do our approval, again, straight there from the email. And if I go in and look at the actual flow that's running here behind the scenes, I can go in and see the one that we just ran and drill into it. To give you an idea of what the design experience this looked like, my trigger was when an item is created. And what I love about this tool is the ability to actually debug your workflow. So again, compare this to SharePoint Designer 2013 or 2010 style workflows. You were doing nothing but like print line, which was the equivalent of write to history list, right, to figure out what was going on. So to be able to go in and see who requested it, who was the approver, what was the status, there's all the details of the list form. If I scroll down, I can see that I did go for that approval process and who was the person that approved it. And then go in and look at the individual conditions. I basically just have a yes track or a no track. And in either one of these, I'm doing an update item. And in that update item, notice there's my list ID. I'm going in and changing the approval status column. That's the little flag there that's telling me whether or not it's in review or approved. And I'm appending the approver's comments to the comments of the requester inside of that same multi-line text box column inside of the SharePoint list. All right, so I said there were three pillars of this, though, right? There was the Power App itself, there was Flow, and Power BI was that last piece. If I go back to my device page, where we ordered the device, and scroll down, I've also embedded a Power BI dashboard, right, that is connected to both the Excel spreadsheet and the SharePoint list. So when we get to the very end of this, I'll give you some clues about how to do that and make sure that it's able to refresh from both sources on the Power BI front. So those are all the individual pieces, right, being used in play. Power Apps from the perspective of creating an application and using it as a custom web part, Flow to kind of dictate workflow, and then reporting capability within Power BI. This almost everybody gets, so I'm hoping we're okay at this point. When people start asking questions, though, beyond that, is, well, that was real simple. That was one list. What about parent and child lists? What about cascading dropdowns? What about validation? And all of these other types of things. You agree those are issues? All right, so that's what we're going to focus on next. The hardest part with creating these demos is coming up with something that seems slightly reasonable from a data standpoint. And I should apologize up front again. Remember I said I was a developer. I'm not a designer. So if it looks pretty, it was an accident. Highly functional. Doesn't look good. So to set this one up, again, this is still, and I know I'm going to ignore my PowerPoint slides for a minute, but this is still in the perspective of using a Power App as an app, right, as an actual web part. So for this one, I have two lists. I have a running teams list, right? Training wheels, scrambled legs, blazing glory. And then I have a list of runners. And notice my runners have a lookup column back to that running team list. So this is your very traditional parent-child type list scenario. So it begs the question, can I create an app or a web part, right, that interoperates with two data sources as opposed to just the one? So let me show you the end result first and show you a little bit about how it was built behind the scenes. So if I go in and take a look at the pages here, I have a runners page, again, sticking with the SharePoint theme of embedding these things inside of pages. right, there's a whole set of controls that are running inside the Power App that's here. The first one is a gallery control, and that gallery control is bound to the actual parent list, which is just the teams themselves. If I choose a team, let's pick on training wheels, I could go in and make some edits to those if I like, but if I just click next, it then pulls up who are the runners that are within it. And any one of these runners, I could go in and edit in the little form that's over here on the left-hand side, right? Or I could go in and add a new person. I'll pick on Rhett, who was just speaking here earlier, but we'll flatter him and say he's 21. Notice this drop-down is set to be the parent, so when it writes that entry back, it'll be a new person that's inside of that particular team, and there's Rhett right there. Right? So a single Power App, but interoperating with two lists. If you look at this inside the Power Apps Designer, again, not showing you all of the pieces. The links to that will walk you through most of it step by step. There are a few tricks that are being done here. First, notice if I zoom in, there's data connections for both the parent and the child list. Right? Obviously, we need both of them. If we go back to the tree view set of controls here, the very first gallery, the very first gallery, if I can select the actual gallery, is just bound to running team. That's the data source of the parent list. But on selected, so once a user chooses one, I'm storing in a variable the item that was chosen. Then it shouldn't surprise you if I go down and look at the gallery. Let's do that this way so I don't have to keep monkeying around with my selections here. Look at the runners gallery, which is hidden right there. The items for the runners gallery, let's zoom back in, is set to the runners gallery. The items property that's set there is a filter of the runners data source, so a filter of the child list, but filter based on the ID value being the same as the ID of the running team that was selected. Right? So take the parent object, choose one, store it as a value, and then take the second control and bind it, filtering based on that value. Not rocket science, yes? Oh, thank you. I will take applause. All right. So before I move on to my next set here, just to give you an idea of what these slides do look like, and I won't switch the screens to embarrass myself with that again. So these slides basically say what demos I'm doing, like the demolition graphics, right? And then there's just references that are links, right? And you can get these slides and the actual exports of some of these on the URL, which I'll pull back up again at the end. So the next ones, we're going to move away from just simply connecting an app using Power Apps in terms of an app and actually use it for some forms, which is more the InfoPath-based scenario. So to do that, let's go over back to our SharePoint site here. I tend to get in tab hell here with how many tabs I open up. So if you see me close and stuff, that's why. I'm sure none of you have ever created a SharePoint list that looks like this. So this is a long list because it has a title column, text 1, text 2, text 3, text 4, text 5, text. It has 20 columns inside that list. I won't ask who's raised their hand, who's done this before. That's not a good thing, right? But what does that experience for your users? Even in the modern user interface, if they click New, look at what that looks like. It's not very pleasant, right? So we can use Power Apps to customize this list form to make this much more usable for your users. So let's cancel this. And I've done that in this list here. So I'll show you the end result, and then I'll show you what are the couple things that are noteworthy from a solution perspective. So if I click New, it opens up the list form on the right-hand side. You don't have to be able to read what I'm typing in here, but let's give it a title of Ignite. And then we could just really quick make this a bunch of characters. What's the difference in this experience? Well, there's only 7 text fields, and I can click Next, and then I can get the next set of them. And click Next and get all the way to that 20th column. And then click Save. And now that it's saved, I went back to the first screen. I should be able to close that. And if I go down to the bottom, there's our new entry, and it wrote all of those columns in. So this is taking a really long list and using some very simple operations to turn it into a wizard-based process. Is that something you'd like to see how it was done? Yes? All right. Because if not, we can move on and go to something else. So if I go to here, I can choose Customize Forms. Now this will open up the Power App Designer, but bound to the user interface, the actual edit forms for this list. I wait patiently and have backup slides if it takes too long. So if you've ever done this before, and usually most people have at least adventured into this, the system automatically generates a user interface for you, guessing based on the schema of the list. And what I did with this one, it's the wrong list. That's my long list backup one. Sorry, my bad. Let's go back to the actual list. I don't want to start all over from scratch. I want to show you the one that's already done. Wondered why it took so long. What it does is it generates a form, and it gives you all of the fields on it as it best can get. Then all I did was duplicate the form, right, to get the number of screens that I wanted, put the little next button to navigate from one to the other, right, then swapped out which fields were on what forms, and then had to deal with how do I put everything back together at the end. Right? So over here on the left-hand side is the actual first screen that got created. All I did was basically go in, duplicate screen, it gave me 3 screens. Right? Navigation buttons are really easy. I could just choose which fields I wanted on each one. The trick is making sure that everything works when the person clicks the new button, when they click edit, and when they click save. And all of that secret sauce is up here inside this SharePoint integration node. So if I click on that, this is showing you the kind of the eventing model that's going on inside of the SharePoint when it's interacting with Power Apps. So for example, in the onNew event, I didn't have just one form that I needed a new version of. I had 3, because I needed 3 blank forms. And then when you see onSave, right, normally the operation that would be here would be a form submit. But I have 3 forms. And I don't really want to submit each one individually. I want all of them to write back to the list as one single entry. So the secret sauce for that, which is documented in the content that's up there, is a patch command. So if I zoom in for you, you can basically say patch. I'm writing to long list, taking all of the defaults, but then taking any updates that's been made to any of the 3 forms. And when I'm done, navigate back to screen 1. Like, don't like. All right. See some more? Yes? Let's go back to that running teams example for a second. Let's go to another list called awards. This list has a title column, an award date, what team, and what runner. What do we have here? So if I click new, I can say this is the Ignite Super Award. Pick an award date of today. I did not build these demos for this resolution, by the way. And then if I want to, notice right now it's set at the natural selection team, and I have my runner here, who's Mr. Cool Beans. But if I go and I check training wheels, that drop-down shows the runners that are specific to that team. So this is your cascading drop-down example. Again, something people always did in InfoPath and want to know how do they do in Power Apps, right? So if I go in and give Rhett the Ignite Super Award, and I save that back, I'm doing a couple other interesting things here. Notice that I'm actually writing last name, first name inside of this field, and I'll point that out to you when I open up the form in Power Apps. So let me go in and customize this one. Show you the end result. And I got one more in this form variety, which is a validation-based scenario. So with the cascading dropdowns here, it's honestly not that different than the one that you saw earlier, which was an app that was running against 2. The difference here, and let me zoom in because this is a little hard for you to see, I know. But I have the actual natural selection runners here, and I'm basically pulling from the items the titles of the running teams, right? And then if I go in and look at the actual runners, I'm filtering, right, the runners where the team's value is whatever the drop-down is that's above it, the selected one's result. So this is what gives you that relationship between parent and child, is based on the drop-down of the first item. It's going to change this value, which then changed the filter for the second list. Now, the only other thing that I did here to make things a little bit easier, and I'll be honest, the more you get to the point where you have lookup column to lookup column to like lookup column, the more it kind of gets broken from like an IntelliSense strong typing type scenario. So I actually cheated in this demo a little bit in that the awards column that there is of just type text for that runner. That's why I'm writing back the whole last name, first name. And you can actually change what you write back to the list by looking at the data card as opposed to the individual dropdown. So for example, if we look at the data card, kind of the container for that runner, it's not the dropdown, the actual data card itself. And then I switch this to the update property. This is where I'm saying, well, when you write back to the list, I really want the actual last name, which is the title field, comma, first name. So you don't necessarily have to present to the user the same values that you're writing back to the list. And your trick is to intercept that at a data card level. All right, that's demo. Next demo's done. We good? All right. I appreciate the feedback. I'm used to working in much smaller groups. All right. So last one of the forums, and then we'll focus a little bit on flow for a minute, if you will. And I know I've killed my SharePoint site here at the minute, so let's get back to that. This one is in the realm of validation. So if I go here, this is a simple travel request system. And I go in, I click New. We can put in what event are we traveling for? What is the start date? Let's pick tomorrow. And then let me go and pick a date in the past. Right? So I'm checking there to make sure that's not a cool thing. You can't travel back in time, right? This is Ignite after all. It's all the Azure AI stuff didn't include time travel with the announcements on Monday. I was in the keynote. I have a choice field here that if I choose special request, I have some additional rules in. Anybody want to tell me what their hotel rates are? And of course, the registration fee, right? It's got to be the highest thing of them all. And I have a rule written here that says if this special request is your category, your registration fee has to be less than or equal to $50. Right? Now, believe it or not, the validation here, though I think valuable, is not what I think the gold nugget of this demo is. The gold nugget of this demo is this. I'm right now not valid. If I click Save, nothing happens. That's the way it should work, right? I can't tell you the number of forums out on the internet today that have people asking how to hide that button. You don't have to hide it. You can work with it, right, with that integration layer that I was pointing out earlier. Because what people want to do is they want to put their own button on the Power App, but your users and using all the rest of SharePoint are going to be used to this dialogue, right? So we got to be able to work with it. So let me show you a little bit what's being done here. If I customize this form, now, to be fair, as this opened up, the rules designer that's here inside of Power Apps is flagged as experimental, which means there's probably a lot of change coming. I'm not making any product announcements in this session. There is actually tomorrow, Chucks, who's the PM that owns the Power Apps and SharePoint integration, is doing a session. I have that at the very end of my presentation. I'll make sure I pull that up. His session will be a good one to follow this one so you get an idea of what they're doing from a roadmap perspective for these types of solutions. So if we go inside of here and look at let's focus on the rules piece that's here. Anybody actually built a rule in Power Apps yet? Not very many people. This is kind of neat. So here's my special request rule. My special request rule, let's edit it. Right? Basically, it has this if statement, which is basically comparing if the registration fee is greater than $50 and the selected item of that dropdown is special request. But then it comes to actions, right? And notice the actions that I have are things like turn the data card to have a red background, which I think is down here from the fill standpoint. Make this bold and make this label visible, right? Commands that you kind of expect to be a little bit InfoPath-ish. But the difference is, notice there's no ability for me just to write what those actions are. If I click Define Actions, let me zoom back out for you. What it's going to do, it's almost macro-like, where it's now going to go in and record what changes do I make inside this form. So let's go in and focus on, say, this text box. And let me zoom back out and make that bold. And now if I click Done, it pulls back my rule designer, and notice it's added another font weight bold for that particular label. I didn't do anything special. That's the way it works, but I appreciate it. Thank you. Right? So that's the way you build the rules themselves. And if you don't like that rule, you can delete that particular line item. We're back to where we were. So like I said, that's the actual rules piece in terms of building the validation that's in there and how you want it to be queued to the user. The gold nugget in this demonstration, like I said before, is inside of this SharePoint integration. So if we go back and we look at the save operation, look at what I've written. Normally, all this would say is submit form, SharePoint form. Right? So I added an if condition. So if not my special request rule. Because if the special request rule is true, that means I'm not valid. So if not that rule, submit the form. Otherwise, do nothing, which is why the save doesn't work when you do anything. All right. Glad we're having fun. All right. So let's go back to the slides for a bit. Thank you. See, I asked for applause. Now I keep getting it. So again, back to the slides here. You have links to the patch function in Power Apps, how to do cascading dropdowns, the rules in the formula, and all the documentation on the SharePoint integration details. Right. So let's take a look at flow and some things that are kind of SharePoint specific to it in terms of its integration, or I should say Power Automate now, right? So let's go and pull up a SharePoint site. So I would be remiss if I did not point out, let's kill some Power App stuff here. We don't need all these things open. Is that there's a lot of flow integration that's just out of the box, that you don't have to do anything in terms of building flows for that. And I like to equate these to your users or your customers that are more familiar with like the SharePoint 2010 style workflows, which is just going in, doing a slight configuration. They're not designing any type of business process, and the flows just go. And there are several of them that I'd like to point out to you. One is if you just select an item and go over to flow inside of the menu here, you notice there is a request sign-off flow that's provided to you. You don't have to write it. And this basically just asks you, who do you want to approve it? It goes off, approves it, comes back, and sets the flag. Not only do we have to do, not only just request sign-off, if I look at the awards list that I had earlier, this one has a date-time column in it. And because of that, there's out-of-box flow integration for set a reminder. I can set a reminder, choose the column, and it basically says, all right, now I'm going to remind you how many days in advance would you like to be reminded. And it'll set up basically a timer-based flow to be able to send you those reminders before they come up. There is a third one, and the third one has to do with page approvals. I have this one set up in my communication site because it's a little bit more realistic. So again, if we go into here, because I'm now at a SharePoint site pages library, I get configure page approval flow. And this would allow you to control the status of a page going from an authoring draft mode until it being released and consumed by the users. And these are all things you don't have to even open up Flow to build. But did you know that you could open up Flow and edit them afterwards? So that's a piece that most people miss. The two of them, the page approval workflow and the reminder workflow, if you don't really like and you feel a little bit limited in what those configuration ones are, they actually get created inside of the Flow tool, and you can then come back and edit them and customize them. So you're not limited just by using that as a starting point. But we're here for more interesting flows. Things, again, that customers ask me how to do all the time, and then Ed builds these for proof of concepts and so forth. Let's open up the annoying approval flow. We do not run this workflow. We just show it, right? So this one, I'll go over some of the key pieces that are here, but a little bit more elaborate. When a file's created, figure out the metadata, and then I initialize a variable that just says as the approval process happened, right? And then these two branches here are a parallel branch. So both the left-hand side and the right-hand side are happening at exactly the same time. The left-hand side does an approval, and whether you approve it or not, the end result is I set this variable that the approval process has completed. Makes sense. Do we know now why this is the annoying approval flow? What's going on the right-hand side? Well, if we go back, let's do a delay every 30 seconds. Do until that variable's been set. Did you do it? 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 You haven't approved it yet. Approve it, approve it, approve it, approve it. No? There are a lot of business processes. Now they're not on 30 seconds, right? In fact, I did run this once and forgot to click approve. It's actually a demo unto itself. The system will protect from running escalating workflows that are issuing that many numbers of requests. So after a couple hundred emails, it actually shut down my workflow. But you do see a lot of processes where something else is going on, and then on a 7-day interval, on a 6-month interval, on some other interval, you have other things that might have to escalate or go in and check back and see on progress. So this idea of using parallel branches to be able to do that logic is a common pattern. Wow. I got time for one more. And for this one, we're going a little bit more hardcore. So this flow is just manually triggered. The trigger's not important. What am I asking for, though? The team name and the alias. And then I do an approval process. If it's been approved, I then use a shape you haven't seen yet before. This is the Azure automation shape. So this basically says, reach out to Azure and run a runbook, which is nothing but a PowerShell script. And what am I doing? I'm passing in the alias and the name of the team. This is going to use the team's PowerShell library to generate teams with an approval process. This is not the only way to do this solution. In fact, it's actually rather simple. Thursday, Michael, one of our architects from the Philadelphia MTC, has 2 sessions back-to-back where he has a flow interacting with a bunch of varieties of different REST APIs to be able to control not only teams being provisioned, but whether or not guest access is turned on or off, and a whole bunch of other logic in terms around the creation of that. This one's a little oversimplified, but still worth running. Yes? All right. So let's go, now that I've kind of shown you how it works, which is kind of the opposite of the way I was doing it before, let's go ahead and run it. I need to provide the team name, the Ignite demo. Actually, let's add a number on the end of that just in case. I didn't add any error handling. And click Run Flow. Now, I do need to approve that. And I'm kind of hoping we can just do that within Flow itself. So there's my approval. Click Confirm. All done. It does take a little while. Provisioning an Office 365 group is not an immediate thing. It's not entirely slow. But while I'm talking a little bit about things from a PowerPoint perspective, we can watch what's going on over here and see whether or not my team gets provisioned. Okay? So to wrap things up, let's switch back over to the slides itself. Oh, wrong one. You know what? This is a little far down for me. Hello. From the slides itself. So what are some of the things that we went around doing in terms of annoying reminders, using Flow to enforce governance, provisioning, calling things along those lines. I actually have more references in the materials than we have demo time here for today. Another one that I've written, which is a 2-part blog post on my blog, is this using Flow to enforce governance is a whole business process, workflow, and logic app to control users' ability to invite guest users. Right, so instead of admins having to do it or users being able to do it entirely, but being able to combine that, and the logic app in that case is using the Graph API, the invitation API, to create those external users. It's something my customers ask a lot about. So again, those are all linked here for you. On the Power BI front, there are a few things that are just kind of noteworthy while we're waiting for that team to get provisioned over there. There are really 2 data sources that dashboard that we used in the very beginning were built off of. And this takes too much time to go through and click through, so I grabbed screenshots for you. It was the Excel spreadsheet, right, and the SharePoint list. Those were the 2 data sources in the first end-to-end demo. So if you want to open up the Power BI desktop tool and start building this dashboard, if you want the dashboard to be able to refresh, you don't want to start by pointing to the Excel spreadsheet locally on your desktop, because it's going to think that's where the connection point is. So for that dashboard, believe it or not, the Excel spreadsheet's just being stored in a library. When you do that, then you have to remember that when you go to get data and you're accessing the spreadsheet, the source that you want here is SharePoint folder. And what allows you to go in and point to your SharePoint site. You'll be able to see the Excel spreadsheet that you have inside that, right? And it'll walk you through the import process then of being able to pull in both my devices table and my manufacturers table that were sitting inside the spreadsheet, right? And I ran that twice, once for each one of them. And then the SharePoint list itself, just go to Online Services, choose SharePoint List. It will ask you how you want to authenticate. All right, you want an organizational account. You want to log in with an Office 365 credential, right? That way, it'll be able to refresh on its own schedule. And once you have that, you can then go in and start picking which of the columns of the list you need or don't need. I went in and got rid of a whole bunch of them. And since I then had a list and a spreadsheet, it did not detect all the relationships between those two. It got one of them, but not both. So being able to go in inside this tool, you can then start to create relationships and choose parent and choose child and kind of navigate them. And then when you're done, you just click Publish, right? And once you click Publish, you then get the ability to embed it into the SharePoint webpage, which is what you saw earlier. It's a little too far scrolled down, right? Anybody see if my team showed up? Hey, Ignite demo number 5, right? You want to see the PowerShell script a little bit? I got another minute or two. Yeah? All right, let's go back. So this is the runbook. Now, something about the runbooks themselves, they have the ability to store what account is used as it's going to log in and interact with the API. So it stores the password for that and the key vault and all those other types of things. But what you probably want to see is this here. And I will say this is not the prettiest code you've ever seen. Let me zoom in here for you for a little bit. I have some defaults just in case I'm missing a team and a title. But if I scroll down, I go and I retrieve the credential that I want the runbook to run as, and then basically say connect to Microsoft Teams with that credential. And then here's whopping big command number 1. Create a new team. Use the name, right, based on the name that was passed in, and use the email alias as well. And then all of the individual settings that you would expect inside of Teams that you can control, whether GIFs are allowed and stickers and what the owners can do, all of those are flags that are here. And yes, I hard-coded them all. If I scroll down even farther, you notice that I've then start doing things like going and inviting other users, right? So I make sure that I am an owner of that team, and then these other users are getting added just as members, and then I'm going and creating teams. So it's a way to kind of templatize teams, if you will, that if you have teams being stood up related to a business process, right, you don't want to give them a blank team with just a general channel and expect everybody to have to go and configure all of it. Right? Now, where this gets much more interesting and where Michael's going to explore more is doing this in a little bit more not cookie-cutter way where I've hard-coded some of these things in, controlling more of the settings. And then I don't know if anybody's been following the Pnp team, the Patterns and Practices team that did the Pnp PowerShell for SharePoint. They have extended that to Teams as well, and there's something called a Pnp Tenant Template. It's basically this really long JSON file which has all of these settings in it with it as well. And I could have built that demo using that set of APIs. This was just a little bit more simple and straightforward using the Teams PowerShell that Microsoft provides. All right. Well, so believe it or not, so we would start a few minutes early in order to end a few minutes early so everybody can go get lunch. Then again, the net of this is that if you think about SharePoint as a whole, SharePoint's one of those products in its history. Anybody been around since SharePoint like 2007, 2003, right? Every release of SharePoint, right after that, SharePoint kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Other products died, like Content Management Server, Performance Point Server, right? SharePoint swallowed them whole. In the cloud, the opposite is happening, right? It's the decoupling of the SharePoint, which means now as SharePoint people, you got to know more things than just the word SharePoint. Right? You got to know a little bit of Power BI. You got to know a little bit of Power Apps. I'd argue you have to know a lot about Flow or Power Automate, right? And expand that out into the larger surface area of Office 365, because all the things that your users expected you as a SharePoint admin to know how to do are now a variety of tools. It's not just one single one anymore. So I hope you appreciated it. At the end, I'll make sure I pull up a few things here to get you out of here. This is a Chalk's session, which is tomorrow at 11:30, which ironically is when I'm repeating my session. So you don't have to come back to mine again. But if you want to see his, he's going to show you the investments the team's been making in this space, and there's a lot of really cool things that he has from an announcement standpoint that I have not ruined at all. And then again, the URL that I had for you here at the very end, again, that's on my point drive. You can download the slides and a lot of the examples and references that are there. You'll be able to follow up with afterwards. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.